right, so as you guys were working on that first one, I heard a lot of data being collected and analyzing that data, and that pretty much sums it up. So just to have the official definition here, statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, summarizing, and analyzing, lots of ings, information or data to draw conclusions. So drawing conclusions, that's the whole goal of statistics, is to do all these other steps, collect, organize, summarize, analyze data in order to draw a conclusion. That is the end goal. So the stuff that we're collecting and organizing and summarizing, all that jazz, is called data. Data can be either numerical values or just some sort of information that's collected by asking questions. So again, data can be either numbers or information, like if you're asking, trying to figure out what the most popular favorite color is. If you're asking someone what's your favorite color and they tell you red, that is a piece of information. It's not a numerical value, but it's still data because you asked a question and you got an answer. Some important things to remember about data is that first, the analysis of it. So analysis of data can lead to very powerful results. So because data is so powerful, it can be dangerous when it's misused. So the misuse of data usually occurs when data is incorrectly obtained and or analyzed. And so because of this, because it is possible to incorrectly obtain and incorrectly analyze data, if you think your data is telling you that a certain relationship exists, you still need to do a little bit of investigating further, just to make sure that everything is legitimate and that you're not trying to mislead people or even accidentally mislead people with your conclusions of your data. And so data varies as you're collecting it. It varies, which means the result we obtain can vary. And so because of this, statistics is different than any other math course that you've had. So usually the math that you're used to is like algebra, where usually there's just one exact answer. So for example, if you had like 3x plus 6 equals 12, x would always equal 2. That's the right answer. There's one right answer. If you didn't get x equals 2, that's wrong. With statistics, however, there is no one right answer. So for example, if we were to try to find the average height of students in this class, and we chose 6 students from the class, depending on what 6 students you randomly choose, you could get a different number for the average height. All possible groups of 6, they would still give you an average height for the class. It would just be a different number, but just because there's a different number doesn't mean it's wrong. You still took the average of 6 students in this class, it's still the average height, but it is a different value. Your results varied. So different samples, people that you collect data from, can lead to different results. And just because they're different doesn't mean they're incorrect. So usually when we're doing these experiments, you will end up getting different answers or different data values from people, but you could still be correct. So moving on, we have this excerpt here. It's a passage explaining an experiment that took place. So we're going to read through it together and identify the important parts of the experiment. So to start, it says a study was conducted to determine if listening to music has any effect on student test scores. So here, when they're giving you or telling you what their experiment is about, if listening to music has any effect on students' test scores, this is called your objective. It's the goal of your experiment, what you're trying to figure out, what question you're trying to answer. And if you look down here at number 1, once you have your research objective, again, the question you're trying to answer, you can determine 2 things. First is the population, which is just the large group of individuals that you're experimenting on. In this case, we're talking about students. And then an individual is just one member of your population. So in this case, it would be one student or each student. Okay, then if we keep reading the second sentence, the researchers randomly divided 60 high school students into 3 groups. So knowing who you're actually doing your experiment on, so in this case the 60 high school students, this is called your sample. So number 2 down below, collecting the information needed to answer the question posed. So who are you going to get your data from? That is called your sample. So it's who you're gathering data from, which in this case would be the 60 high school students. So the difference between the sample and the population, the sample is specifically who are you asking, who are you experimenting on, the 60 students. The population is, in terms of your research question, what is the big group that you're actually trying to, that you're looking at for your experiment. So the 60 high school students is who you're actually experimenting on, but you care about how this research question affects students as a whole. So the large group is the large population, would be just all students, and then the sample would be specifically who are you experimenting on, so the 60 students. Okay, and then moving on in our explanation up here, the 20 students in group 1 listened to classical music while testing, 20 students in group 2 listened to rock music, and the 20 students in group 3 tested in silence. The students in group 1 averaged 80% on the test, so here where we're explaining the results of our experiment, that is important. So the students in group 1 averaged 80%, group 2 averaged 70%, and group 3 averaged 76%. These are called your descriptive statistics. And they're just statistics that are describing the results of your experiment. So down here, number 3, descriptive statistics is where we organize and summarize the data obtained from your sample. So in this case, that would be like the 80% score, the 70%, and the 76. That's just explaining the results of your experiment. They graded the tests. Those were the results. The last sentence, the researchers concluded that listening to classical music while testing minimally improved test scores. This is your conclusion that you make by using what's called inferential statistics. So inferential statistics is where you take the descriptive statistics, the results of your experiment, and then you infer or you apply that to your larger population. So even though you didn't test every single student, based on our experiment, we can infer that the same results would be true for all students for your larger population. So inferential statistics is where you apply your descriptive statistics to your larger population. All right. Moving on. We're going to be looking at variables next. So first we have to figure out what is a variable. A variable, basically, it just represents something. It can change or vary. And the variable is what you're collecting when you're collecting your data. Okay, so a variable could be like height. If you're going to go around and ask everybody their height, the variable would be height. You could do color if you're trying to figure out what everybody's favorite color is. That could be the variable. So it's just whatever you're collecting through your experiment or through your questioning. So on the next page, we have two types of variables that we're going to be dealing with. And they are called quantitative and qualitative variables. So I'll start with quantitative. Quantitative data has to do with a quantity. So quantitative quantity. It's you're either counting things or you're measuring things. Yes, numbers. Yeah. So it's a quantity. It's a numerical piece of data. If I could spell numbers right. Something that you count or measure. Okay, so quantitative data has to do with a quantity, a number of something. Whereas qualitative data has to do with a quality or something that's not a number. So it could be like colors, red, blue, green, kind of pets you have, cat, dog, fish. When the answers to the questions are not numbers, that's qualitative data. It's a descriptive piece of data. Okay, so quantitative quantifies something, so number of, or some sort of measurement like in inches or measuring time. Qualitative is some sort of descriptive piece of data. You're describing something. So a color, describing the type of pet you have, cat, dog, something like that. So just to practice identifying between these two types of variables, if you look at example 2, I have a list of different types of variables there. I want you to work with the people that you're sitting with. You're going to underline the qualitative one. So underline the qualitative and circle the quantitative. So go ahead, go through these lists of variables with your group members to identify qualitative and quantitative. All right, so number of siblings. Is that qualitative or quantitative? Quantitative. You're counting how many siblings you have. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is a number. What about grams of carbs in a donut? Quantitative. It's a number of carbs. You're counting carbs. What about population of a state? Quantitative. You're counting the people. Wait time for a ride. Quantitative. You're counting time or measuring time. Measuring time. Yeah, we don't count time. We can count minutes, we can count hours, but time in general is a measurable thing. What about eye color? Qualitative. Price of a, oops, I circled it. Eye color. Price of a car. Price of a car? Quantitative, right? You count money. What about student ID number? Do you count ID numbers? What is the purpose of an ID number? To identify somebody, to describe somebody. So just because your answer is technically a number doesn't necessarily mean it's a quantitative variable. So in this case, student ID is qualitative because you're describing a person with the ID number. That's the whole point of an ID number. What about number on a football player's jersey? What's the purpose of a jersey number?
That can be either, depending on.
Just say when.
Because an example of it being quantitative is like a team has just a certain amount of players and then they'll get.
Well, that would just be number of players on a team.
True.
Not jersey numbers. Qualitative, right? Because a jersey number is a way to identify a player. So that's qualitative. What about a phone number?
Oh my God.
Qualitative, same idea, yep. And what about marital status? Qualitative, yes. So these types of things, these numbers that can describe people, you got to be careful of those. Just because technically the answer you're getting is a number does not automatically mean it's quantitative. In order for it to be quantitative, you have to either be able to measure it or to count it. So those are the two things. And so in light of that, there are two types of quantitative variables, those that you count and those that you measure. So the two types are called, the first one is discrete. These are both quantitative. Discrete variables are those that you count. They are countable. So it's like number of sort of data that you're collecting. Number of trees, number of seats in a movie theater, number of dollars. Whereas continuous quantitative variables are variables that you measure. So like time, weight, distance, etc. So the difference between discrete and continuous, when you are counting something, you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's it. You're just counting up. There's no really in-between numbers there. With continuous, there is an infinite possibility for measurement. If you want to measure to the point 0.00000000001 inch, you could do so, and it could go on forever and ever. There is a continuous amount of possible values for that variable, whereas with discrete, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're just counting. So discrete is countable, continuous is measurable. That's how you distinguish between the two quantitative variables. One important difference here, so kind of like between qualitative and quantitative, how there are some numbers that can describe people. In terms of time, if we're just saying how long it takes to do something or just time in general, that's a continuous variable because you measure time. However, if I want to know like how many minutes or how many hours, that's giving us a specific unit to count. You would count how many minutes it takes. You would count how many hours. So that's the difference in terms of time. That's the one that can get a little confusing between these two. So with that in mind, take a look at example 3, and we're going to practice identifying between discrete and continuous. So we're going to underline the discrete, so the countable ones, and circle the continuous, the measurable ones. So take a few minutes, work with the people around you, and circle and underline. So the first one, number of tails after flipping, number of tails after flipping a coin 5 times. Is that discrete or continuous? Discrete. You just count how many times did you get tails. 1, 2, 3. What about weight of a child? Continuous. You measure weight. Number of trees in a park. Discrete. You would just go there and count the trees. Temperature. Continuous. Temperature is something that you measure. next column, length of a song. Yep, continuous because you measure. Distance from school to your house. Continuous, you just measure that. How many hours it takes to drive up north. Discrete. So this is what I talked about before, how the number of hours, the number of minutes, that you would just be counting. 1, 2, 3 takes 3 hours to go up north. And then the last one, points scored in a basketball game. Discrete. You would count your points. Okay? So again, with the variables, there's quantitative and qualitative. Those are the two main categories of variables. And then within quantitative, there is discrete quantitative and continuous quantitative. So on the last page of the notes, and we'll have this at the end of every note packet, is